It's 2 o'clock, and a couple of things, just housekeeping things. Please remember to press the button when you wish to talk, so that when the light comes on green, you're hot. When it's red, you're not, but we can probably still pick it up. You'll also notice that the cameras are embedded in the wall now, and they are turned on. And so keep that in mind. And then I want to begin today by calling the meeting to order, but then to thank everybody for their flexibility. The primary reason that we moved our meeting today is because of our friend Tiffany, who is in this year's Leadership Knoxville class. And Tiffany, we're very proud of you, and I don't know whether you have the best class ever. I will simply say that my class had 2 mayors and a governor. So you decide. But anyway, we're very proud of you, and so I'm glad for everybody supporting our effort to honor Tiffany by being at the luncheon today. The staff has a particular challenge today because in Celeste time, this is called nap time. And we have discussions on budgets, on rates, and on bond financing. I can't think of a more exciting agenda to talk about after lunch. But so I'll encourage all of us to do our best to stay awake. But the staff, we appreciate your particular challenge today. So. Mr. Coley, I believe we're all here, and so please note that. We now need to approve our minutes from April 21. They were in your packet. Do I hear a motion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. They're approved. Official action, we have a number of resolutions. I'll call on Mr. Bolus to lead us through the discussions.
Yes, as we discussed in the April budget meeting, we do have 5 resolutions for your approval. I'll introduce Mark Walker, our Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, to go over each of those resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Bolus. Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Afternoon.
Elba and I were walking down with Celeste to the event, and Celeste remarked that this was her second favorite board meeting of the year, only, I guess, second to the April financial workshop. And I think it's appropriate that our first presentation coming back is a financial presentation. But anyway, I will try to keep it as interesting as possible for you. We do have several official action items that my presentation will touch on. We're going to start with an amendment to our current fiscal year appropriations for the gas division. And then we'll talk about FY23 budget. And then we're going to talk about some of the funding, the water and wastewater rate increases that are being proposed, the new bonds that are being proposed, and we'll close with commitment appropriations. So first we'll talk about our proposed budget amendment for FY22. At this time last year, the board adopted a total budget for the gas division of $131.4 million. That included about $57 million for purchased gas cost or wholesale gas cost. As you all know, energy prices have been surging over the course of the past several months, and natural gas prices included. So right now, our most recent forecast calls for us to be about $17 million over budget for wholesale gas cost. As a result, we are requesting additional appropriations of $20 million to cover that overage and also to provide a little bit of a cushion in the event that our forecast for the month of June turns out to be a little low. I do want to point out, and you may recall, that changes or increases in purchased gas costs do flow through to our customers through the purchased gas adjustment mechanism. So if you were looking at the revenue side of it, our operating revenues are actually $18 million over budget for the year, slightly more than the increase in expenses in that. I'll be happy to answer any questions on the FY22 budget amendment before we move on. Okay. Our proposed FY23 budget, you may recall in total, it is $1.11 billion. This does mark the first time in our history that we have proposed a budget in excess of $1 billion. It is represent an increase of $131 million over the current fiscal year budget, and that's driven by several factors, but three primary ones. And first is the first full year of deployment of our fiber network, which is electric system cost. Of course, the fiber system is part of the electrical distribution system, and then fiber services to the home, the first year of doing that. It's also driven by the first year of our multi-year project at MBW for our filter resiliency project, new water filters, and then also higher wholesale energy prices as well is driving the increase. The total budget includes $278 million in capital improvements for all 4 or 5 utility systems combined. I'm used to saying 4. The big ticket items, $131 million of the capital budget is for our ongoing Century 2 infrastructure programs, and $79 million is for fiber network continuation and fiber services to the home. To help fund that capital budget, we are proposing to issue $103 million in new bonds, and that includes $79 million for the electric system, $11 million for the water system, and $13 million for the wastewater system. And then, as we have previously discussed on several occasions, we are proposing 3 years of rate increases for both water and wastewater service, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a few minutes.
Mark, in the $131 million for Century 2, will that get us on the road to catching up on the projects that we postponed because of COVID?
Yes, to a large extent it will, because that was part of the reason that we were able to eliminate and reduce rate increases in FY 21 and 22 was because of deferral of capital work. Yes, sir. Touching upon just some of the key programs and projects that are in the proposed appropriations for FY 23, again, $79 million for fiber network and services to the home, $29 million for the first year of the work on the filter project at MBW. We have $15.2 million for the completion of our new electric in-feed substation on Western Avenue that we discussed at the April financial workshop. And all of these items we discussed at the April financial workshop. We also have $13 million for vegetation management. $12 million of that is in O&M, $1 million of that is in capital, but that helps us to sustain a strong, reliable electrical system for our customers. $13.25 million is included mostly for utility relocations associated with the construction of the new downtown baseball stadium, and that is spread over 4 systems, that cost. I do want to point out that upon the stadium going into operations and they've been playing, and then with the surrounding developments, we are projecting $930,000 in new sales margins beginning, and that will help us defray or cover the capital cost over time. All 4 systems, electric, gas, water, and wastewater. Yes, sir. Okay. And then we have $8.6 million in appropriations for customer assistance programs. And a large portion of that, $6.5 million, represents this TVA pandemic recovery credits that we started receiving in December of 21 that will go through November of 22. Of that $8.6 million, $5.9 million is for utility bill financial assistance. $2.4 million is for home weatherization. And there's $100,000 for our Water Savers program as well, included in that number. Those are just some of the key items that are built into that $1.1 billion budget. Looking at the budget, as you know, each system has its own budget that has to be approved by the board as they're all financially independent. For the electric system, in total, it's $725 million. For gas, it's $140 million. For water, it's $99 million. Wastewater is $126 million, and fiber is $21 million in total for each of the respective systems. Draw your attention to the far right column. Wholesale Energy does represent the largest single component of our budget. It is $493 million for FY23, and you can see that the $425 from electric and $68 million for the gas. We have a $188 million O&M budget to help operate and maintain our utility systems. The $278 million capital budget we referenced earlier, you'll note that a large portion of that, $155 million, is in the electric system. And then $90 million for debt service payments on outstanding bonds, and also some interest and principal payments. You'll see the $1.3 million in the fiber column. That's beginning to repay some interest and principal on the interdivisional loan that electric makes to fiber for startup operations. And then $42 million in taxes and tax equivalent payments, and rounded out with $20 million is the amount of the interdivisional loan from electric to fiber for FY23, again to help sustain and fund startup operations for fiber. So in total, the $1.11 billion budget. I'll try to go through these next 5 slides fairly quickly. A lot of it we've already talked about at the April workshop, but it does break down the components of each of these 5 major cost components for the budget. Wholesale Energy, again, $493 million. $425 million of that is to be paid to TVA. We are projecting to purchase about 6.1 billion kilowatt hours of electric power from TVA to meet the needs of our 200,000 plus electric customers next fiscal year. On the gas side, $68 million is budgeted for the cost of commodity gas and also what we pay to the interstate pipelines to reserve capacity and transport that gas to Knoxville for delivery to our customers. Now, I will mention that the gas cost per decatherm that we put in the budget is currently below what the current market for natural gas prices is, as that has continued to rise over the past couple of months. So we budgeted about $5.60 per decatherm, which was quite a bit more than we budgeted last year, but still current market prices are exceeding that. We hope those to temper over time, and hopefully inflation will temper somewhat as well on that. But just to go ahead and mention that to you. On the O&M side of the house, $188 million. For a big part of that, $85 million is labor-related expenses. We have a projected full-time staffing level in our budget of just under 1,180 employees. So payroll represents $62 million of our O&M budget. Now, there's about $16 million of payroll that actually appears in the capital budget for capital-related labor. So our total payroll for the 1,179 employees is about $78 million, even though you only see $62 million here. Medical benefits comprise about $14 million of the proposed budget. There's $1 million for training and $8 million for post-employment benefits. That includes required contributions for actuarial valuations to our pension trust and OPEB trust. Those two combined make up about $4 million. And then there's $4 million in 401k matching contributions for employees as well. The remainder of the O&M budget is basically material cost, payments we make to various contractors that help us maintain our utility systems, which includes vegetation management. There's blockage abatement for our wastewater collection system. There's hydrant maintenance for the water system. And there is a host of other items that we employ contractors for to help us do maintenance on our utility systems. And then there's material cost. Stock materials is $9 million in the proposed budget. Utility cost, most of that is electric power to operate our water and wastewater treatment plants and pump stations, et cetera. And that's $10 million in the proposed budget. And then we have $8 million for fiber-related operating expenses, as we do plan to, starting in September, to begin actually providing fiber broadband services. So $4 million of that budget is for cost of goods sold, what we have to pay sort of like the wholesale side to be able to deliver broadband services to our customers. And then $4 million is in access and utilization fees. You'll recall that the fiber division will pay to the electric division for the use of electric system assets in providing the broadband services. And that's O&M. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. We've talked about in past board meetings that you've been evaluating the possibility of bringing in-house more vegetation management or tree management maybe. Is that reflected here? Do we have a target that we want to meet?
I can't speak to the target. I know that there is a portion of vegetation management work that I believe I'll defer to John Williams on that, but that we have done some in-house work on maybe some of the tree removal.
Yeah, in short, some of the hazardous tree removals, trees that are outside the trim zone that could fall into our lines, which is a significant portion. We've got a crew dedicated that is KUB to removing those. We've also moved and shifted some of the supervision of some of the field work internally as well. We've added some more foresters, which Darwin could add to as well. So we're bringing some of that slowly in-house, but the majority of what you're seeing there in the $12 million is indeed outside services, third parties that are out there doing the traditional vegetation management for us.
Thank you, John. Moving to the capital budget, again, we've talked about $278 million. 89% of that, or about $250 million, is directly related to utility system infrastructure, which is really no surprise on that. In addition to the $79 million for the fiber network and fiber services to the home, some of the other major expenditures include $35 million for water and wastewater treatment plant upgrades. The big ticket item there is $29 million for the filter project at MBW that we've referenced before. Also, some other key notable projects include $19 million for substation upgrades, $18 million for electric distribution and transmission line improvements, and $24 million for main and pipe replacement for our water, natural gas, and wastewater systems as part of that budget as well. So a lot of Century 2 embedded in those various items. Debt. We have $90 million in debt service payments budgeted for FY23. We have $1.1 billion in outstanding bonds as of now. We will be making $47 million in principal payments and $43 million in interest payments in FY23. A very small portion of that is not related to the bonds. The $1.3 million of that is related to fiber, repaying electric for the interdivisional loan. As I mentioned, we are proposing to issue $103 million in new bonds to help fund the electric, water, and wastewater system capital budgets. And you can see again what those amounts are on there. Any questions about debt service? We've got a lot more to talk about debt here in a few minutes.
Just one quick question. Have you looked at any timing for when you think that debt issuance will be, or are you really just waiting to balance needs and market conditions?
It's more the latter. As far as it is a very good question. When I talked to our financial advisor last week, if we issued then, we'd be below 4%. On one hand, you might say, let's go as soon as we can. On the other hand, I think we have to be careful, given still the ongoing supply chain issues, material issues there, that we don't get over-issue.
Right.
So I think we have the cash flow flexibility to be able to wait several months, and that's why we're actually targeting late summer, early fall, to make sure there's not significant reductions in our capital forecast. We don't want to over-issue the debt, and that's really the key point there.
This is probably a spurious relationship, but I can't help but notice that the amount of outstanding bonds is almost exactly equal to our budget. Yeah. Is that a reasonable measure, or is that just something that happened to happen this time? Is that a reasonable measure of appropriate levels of indebtedness?
My boss tells me he doesn't believe in coincidences, but I think this time it is a coincidence.
Okay. Yeah, but 1 year's worth of operating expense equals to outstanding debt might be an interesting thing to go back and look at some point when you have a lot of extra time on your shirt.
Sure. Will do.
That 1.1 billion, with the B,
yes,
is based on the new bonds. Remember we did some reissuance of bonds and got some lower rates?
We did some refinancing. Saved about $4 million. Okay. That's factored into that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll talk here in just a few minutes about more detail about each of the electric, water, and wastewater bond profiles and the new issuances. The final major cost component is taxes and tax equivalents, which total $42 million in our proposed budget. $35 million of that is for in lieu of tax payments to the various taxing jurisdictions in which our systems are located. $23 million to the city of Knoxville is budgeted, $11 million for Knox County, and $1 million combined to the other taxing jurisdictions. We do have dollars that are in the budget for what we would pay the city that do accommodate the recently adopted property tax increase. The total estimated increase from what we would pay the city is about $1.8 million or 8.5% over what we paid for the current fiscal year.
In the way our charter is structured, we'll always do pilots unless there's some legislative change both from city and county and state.
Electric and gas pilots are reflected, and how they're calculated is actually reflected in state law.
State law. Mm-hmm.
But they're also addressed in the city charter as well. Water and wastewater is not addressed in state law, but the city charter does address those.
Both of those.
Okay. The remaining component of the budget is federal payroll taxes that we remit to the federal government on a monthly basis.
And those are optional, so you don't have to do those.
That's the first thing to go. Yes. if you told me to cut budget, we're beginning with the payroll tax. No implications there.
None whatsoever.
Except somebody else will be sitting here next year. Funding the FY23 budget, $1.11 billion. It's really the chart on the right-hand side of the slide. I draw your attention to utility system revenues. $942 million are projected for FY23 that would go to fund the budget. $103 million in new bonds. We have $46 million in general fund cash on hand for all 5 utility systems combined that will also help to fund the budget. And then we have the $20 million, again, interdivisional loan going from electric to fiber that is part of the funding as well. So next we're going to talk about what some of the official action items or funding recommendations are. And we'll begin with the proposed water and wastewater rate increases. I know we've talked about this on several occasions before, but I would like to start by going back a couple of years. Prior to the pandemic, we had planned to raise water rates 5% per year. In FY21, we were able to eliminate that rate increase. In FY22, we were able to reduce it from 5% to 2%. That was done largely through project deferrals, but also cost savings as well. For wastewater, we had 3% increases planned in both FY21 and FY22, and both of those were eliminated for basically the same reasons, project deferrals and cost savings. But, as we've already discussed, some of our Century 2 work and some of our treatment plant projects were deferred as a result of that. So rate increases are needed going forward to basically sustain the needed funding levels for our Century 2 programs, for water pipe replacement and water treatment plant projects, wastewater collection system pipe replacement, and also wastewater treatment plant projects. So what are we proposing? For water, 3 5% rate increases, 3 annual 5% rate increases. They would be effective in July of each year and would be reflected on customer bills in August. So let's talk about water first of all. For the average residential water customer, their bill would increase $1.40 in August of 22, $1.50 in August of 23, and $1.60 in August of 24, for a total increase for all 3 years of $4.50 on the monthly bill. To put that into context, the current average monthly bill is $28.60. For wastewater, 3 4% increases. So, effective July of each year and reflected on August bills. So, what does that mean for the average residential wastewater customer? In August of 22, the bill would increase $2.60. In August of 23, $2.70. In August of 24, $2.75 for a total of $8.05. To put that into context, the current average monthly bill for wastewater is $65.50 for the average customer. That's residential. For our non-residential, for our business customers, basically the impacts on their monthly bills for these increases is going to vary. It's going to be based upon the rate classification. It's going to be based also more so on their monthly usage as well. So we will be communicating with our key account customers about the impacts that are going to be projected impacts on their bills. And that's the rate increases. Now, the really fun part is talking about debt more. I'm getting you warmed up for Chris to come along later. For electric, we're proposing to sell up to $79 million in new electric bonds. Those will mature over a period of 30 years. At our budgeted interest rate of 4% on average, that translates to $59 million in interest cost over the life of the bonds. We've already talked about when we're projecting to sell, and that would be late summer or early fall, and that applies to electric, water, and wastewater. So when we're looking at what does our total electric bond profile look like, I did put some bullet points on there about that. Including the new bonds and the projected interest cost, our total electric debt service is $582 million over 30 years. That includes $384 million in bonds and $198 million in interest over the life of those bonds. Over the next 10 years, we will pay $265 million of that interest cost, including $150 million of the bonds. As we talked about last month, the electric outstanding bond is going to increase over the 7-year period of when we're building out our fiber network and providing fiber services, and then it will be a gradual decline over the latter part of our long-range plan. And that's electric. Similar chart for water. Proposing up to $11 million in new bonds, a projected interest cost of approximately $8 million over the life of the bonds. They will also mature over a period of 30 years. So including the new bonds, total water debt service is $290 million over the 30-year period. That includes $203 million in bonds and $87 million in interest cost. And you can see what we would repay over the next 10 years. It's $144 million in debt service and $88 million in bonds retirements over that period of time. And that's water. Wastewater. We know we have a lot of outstanding wastewater debt, but issues are getting smaller over time, and we are driving down that level of debt over time. But this $13 million issue, the projected interest cost is approximately $9 million. Again, it will mature over a period of 30 years. And really, like the others, I didn't mention this, some of the others, a levelized payback structure on that. As far as total wastewater debt service, $745 million over the life of the bonds. $485 million in principal, $260 million in interest cost over time. Over the next 10 years, we'll pay off $327 million in debt service, and that includes $162 million in debt itself. Outstanding wastewater debt will be driven down, will be around $410 million, if I remember correctly, by the end of our long-range plan. And at one time, we were well above $500 million. So we are committed to doing that, but still getting the needed work done on the wastewater system over time. I just wanted to give you a sense of what the total debt service picture looked like for each of those three systems.
Mark, I noticed on the chart on that and the previous one, and I can't recall if the previous one to that is also the case, the blue line is very high in the first year, or is higher in the first year. Is that because of refinancing?
No, that has nothing to do. This is just for the new bonds. And that has more so to do with trying to levelize the debt service out and just the timing on that first year. Because your interest cost isn't going to be as much. We're paying a little bit more in principal on that first year to help levelize the structure out. It has nothing to do with the refinancing. This is all new stuff. This is what that chart represents. Okay. Anything else on wastewater? Okay. Our estimated professional fees from our financial advisor, bond counsel, rating agencies, other partners in selling new bonds is projected to total $414,000. That represents about 0.4% or 40 basis points of the par value of the bonds, which is very competitive. And then I will close with Bill Coley's favorite subject, commitment appropriations. And just as a reminder, this authorizes KUB to commit to cash expenditures beyond its fiscal year. We need to have an appropriation. Often this is multi-year projects like the MBW filter project. In total, we're requesting $131 million in commitment appropriations. You can see the respective amounts by system in your board packets. I did think we had a list of projects that supported all of those commitment appropriations amounts, which electric's 43, gas 11, water's 47, wastewater's 26, and fiber is 3. So that's $131 million. And the last slide I have is just noting some of those projects. Oh, yes.
I would like to understand a little better what the appropriations mean.
Sure. Our city charter requires that any dollars that are to be expended or committed to be expended by KUB be covered with an appropriation. So our FY23 budget, this $1.11 billion that you will hopefully adopt today, that covers cash out the door for FY23. But some of these projects, like the MBW filter project, when we enter into deals with contracts with contractors that'll work on that, commits KUB to pay dollars beyond June 30, 23, beyond FY23. And by charter, we need an appropriation to cover that as well.
If we didn't have the authority to do that, no contractor would do work for us because he wouldn't know, she wouldn't know whether or not we had the authority to spend the money in year 2 and year 3.
It's to be in compliance with the charter. And so that concludes my comments. Hopefully that was somewhat lively and entertaining for you.
Very exciting.
I know it was for me. And Celeste.
I hope it was good for you too.
So I'll be happy to answer any more questions you have before you begin voting on the official action.
Other questions? All right. Shall we take a series of votes now? All right. On Resolution 1454, do we have a motion to approve on first and final reading?
Second.
Seconded. Do we have any visitors who would like to speak on this particular resolution? All right. Seeing none, Mr. Coley, call the vote.
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Caballero.
Aye.
Commissioner Feinbaum.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson-Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Resolution 1454 has passed on first and final reading.
Okay, we'll move on to Resolution 1455. You see what this one's about. I'll request a motion. Do I hear a motion to approve on first and final reading?
So moved.
I'm sorry, this is on first reading.
Yeah, first reading. So moved.
Celeste, okay. A second?
Second.
We have a second here. Do we have any visitors who'd like to speak? Seeing none, Mr. Coley.
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Caballero. Aye. Commissioner Feinbaum. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson-Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Resolution 1455 has passed on first reading.
Just for my clarification, is this first and final, or is this first and
For 1455, it's the first of 2 readings. I'm sorry, I was remiss in not mentioning that.
That's good.
Second reading on the rate increases will occur at the June meeting.
Great. Thank you. On Resolution 1456, you see the summary on the screen. I'll entertain a motion in second. So moved. Moved. Second. All right. Any visitors? Seeing none, Mr. Coley.
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Caballero.
Aye.
Commissioner Feinbaum. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Resolution 1456 has passed on first and final reading.
Right. Thank you. Resolution 1457, you see the summary on the screen. I'm open to a motion and second on first and final reading of 1457.
So moved.
Okay, move.
Second.
Second. Multiple seconds. Any visitors? Seeing none, Mr. Coley.
Okay, Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Caballero. Commissioner Feinbaum. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Resolution 1457 has passed on first and final.
And that brings us to Resolution 1458. I'm open to a motion and a second on first and final readings. Do I hear a motion?
Move to approve.
Move.
Second.
Second. Thank you. Any visitors? Okay. Mr. Coley.
Getting behind here. Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Caballero. Commissioner Feinbaum. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Resolution 1458 has passed on first and final reading.
Very good. Mr. Bolus?
Yes, Commissioners, I want to recognize Tiffany Martin, recent LK grad and Vice President and Chief Customer Officer, to present to you a resolution considering involving our Rounded Up program.
Thank you, Mr. Bolus, and Commissioners. Again, thank you for your flexibility, your attendance, and your support. I really appreciate all of you. As Mr. Bolus mentioned, today I'm going to be bringing to you Resolution 1459 related to our Rounded Up partners. Before we go into details of the actual resolution, I'd just like to go over a brief summary of the program itself, as well as some of our other weatherization programs for your reference. If you'll recall, the Rounded Up program began in 2015 as a 3-year pilot. That pilot was successful, and the program was established as an ongoing program in 2018. Since that program has began, what the program is intended to do is essentially take customer contributions to allow for home energy efficiency upgrades to be done in homes of low-income renters and homeowners in the KUB service territory. And the way that works is those customers opt to voluntarily round their bill to the next whole dollar, and all those funds go towards weatherization. The program currently is administered by the Knoxville, Knox County Community Action Committee, CAC. And they were selected as our partner during that time because they had a long history of administering weatherization programs, as well as their connection to the low-income community. They actually service a lot of the low-income programs, and so it was just an ideal fit to be able to support those community members. The program has been successful and helped a lot of customers. On average, there's about 50 to 60% of our customers that do opt into the program, and because of that, about $4.9 million have been raised in customer contributions. Approximately about 600 homes were weatherized with those funds, and that work continues today, so that's continuing on now. Customers do see energy consumption reduction, and so that's the intent, which leads to savings on their utility bill. On average, about $200 annually is what we're seeing customers save. Some more, some less, but $200 is about where the average savings we see. In addition to that savings, we do hear from customers they're able to enjoy their whole home, they have more comfort in their home, and some of those homes have increased the health and wellness of the people living in those homes. Now, obviously, this is a great program. We've helped a lot of people, but the need is still great. Currently, there are about 500 customers on CAC's waiting list, and so we do want to continue to move the needle on that list. There are some additional weatherization funds and programs, so I just want to remind you of those as well. The Knoxville Extreme Home Energy Makeover That actually began shortly after the Rounded Up program. It was funded through a $15 million grant from TVA, and for that program, about 1,300 homes were weatherized during that time. It was a temporary program. It was only intended to last for 2 years, and so it did end in 2017. Shortly thereafter, in 2018, TVA started their Home Uplift program, with the same intent. What they did is worked with local power providers like us to provide matching funds for weatherization. So during that program, they did provide about $1.6 million to the CAC program to allow for weatherization to continue for homes. In 2021, a change was made with that program, and all the funds that were being provided through TVA began being funneled through Clear Result, which is their third-party partner that administers the program in other markets where they have weatherization programs. So essentially, they were syncing the program up with their other programs in other regions. We've seen some success with weatherization happening with that partner here in the Knoxville region, and have really been able to benefit from having CAC as well as Clear Result administer the program. In addition to those funding sources, as you all know, KUB has made a budgetary commitment to weatherization with a little over $1 million in our annual budget, and then recently some additional funds through TVA credits and things of that nature. We've also been able to secure some grants, one through the Tennessee Department of Environmental Conservation, and that $750,000 grant was funneled through the Clear Result administration as well. Obviously, and you all are committed to continuing with weatherization, we are as well. What's a little challenging is when the Rounded Up program was established in 2018, it specified that those customer contributions must be administered by CAC. And at this time, we'd like the flexibility to be able to funnel those funds to Clear Result, CAC, and if we identify other partners that can do this work, we'd like the flexibility to be able to do that. So Resolution 1459 simply amends the original resolution, allows us to partner with CAC as well as other agencies to complete the work, and it also gives the authority of the President and CEO to identify and select those partners. That's really all I have, but what questions?
I have a question, Tiffany. You may remember, and I can't remember how long ago it was, but we had a team come in and show us different weatherization tips. It was really interesting. And I just wondered, are we continuing that education element in addition to the actual weatherization of the homes?
Yes, we are. So we offer that as a service through our customer counseling office as well as our customer support staff. They will go into pretty much any group that requests that, as well as we try to be deliberate with some of our direct partners. Home Source is a good example. They service low-income families and help them move towards home ownership, and so we do regular classes with them. We still do classes with CAC and other partners. And anyone really in the community that's interested in that, we do provide those educational sessions. Yes.
Other questions?
So that 500 waiting list, Clear Results will start to help whittle that list down?
Yes.
Is that the plan?
That's our desire, is to be able to help them, have them help us move the list down.
Other questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion and second on Resolution 1459 on first and final reading.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any members of the public wish to speak to this? Seeing none, Mr. Coley.
Commissioner Askew. Aye. Commissioner Caballero.
Aye.
Commissioner Feinbaum. Aye. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small. Aye. Resolution 1459 is passed.
Thank you. Mr. Bolus.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. I want to introduce Chris Hood, Director of Finance. Mark Warren does up with the bond presentation, and now Chris will present you the new bond issuings we just did and the details of it. So, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Bolus. I will get us back on track with our fun day of finance with not one but two bond presentations. So here we go. In April, KUB not only sold new revenue bonds in our electric and wastewater divisions to support capital projects, but we also refunded existing debt from 2015 issues in our electric, water, and wastewater divisions. So I'll start out and talk about the new bond sales that generates new money to expand, for example, our Century 2 projects. Then we'll close out with the refunding. So starting out on April 4th, KUB, through a competitive bid process, offered bonds in our electric and wastewater divisions. The bond market responded positively to those offerings, and we actually sold those two issues with a premium. And what that means is the underwriters of those bonds determined that in trade-off for higher coupon or higher interest rates over the life of the bonds, they were willing to pay over par and give us more money on the front end. So in our electric division, we sold $45.7 million worth of new debt. That generated $50.3 million to spend on new capital projects. In wastewater, likewise, we sold $11.1 million of new bonds, generating $12.2 million of net proceeds to spend on new projects. So overall, this is 30-year debt, and like I said, the bond market responded positively. We'll go through the bond results for each of these in a few minutes. But one thing I wanted to note is also on this debt, we had budgeted right at 3.5% in our long-range plans for these sales. Both these issues came in under that budget amount. So while this is not a savings like it would be for our refinancing, compared to what we had budgeted, we saved right at $3.5 million compared to budget. That breaks out to $2.4 million in electric and $1.1 million in wastewater savings. And those are actually calculated in the plans that Mark already talked about. So really, before we talk about the sales themselves, just a review here of the ratings process. Anytime KUB issues debt, we have to go through the ratings process. We use both Standard & Poor's and Moody's to rate KUB's debt. In this instance, there's a lot going on in this chart. I'm just going to talk about just a couple things. But we had to have ratings on our electric, water, and wastewater systems, and that's due to the fact that we refunded debt in water as well. So a couple things to note here. If you rewind the clock to last year when we met with S&P, S&P did not react as positively as we would have liked to have had them react to the potential launch of a fiber division. At the time, they noted that additional risk was in place, and they placed an outlook of negative on KUB with our AA electric bond rating. Fast forward to today, S&P came through as promised. We did launch the fiber division, and S&P did downgrade KUB's debt. Now, I will tell you, the conversation with S&P was much more positive this time. I think they understand our approach better, but they still recognize the fact that additional risk is out there with the dollar outlay that we need to support the electric fiber network. So there is more risk. S&P recognizes that. Now, they have reset our outlook to stable. So I think if we work through the rollout of our fiber, S&P will work with us on that, and we may be able to establish that higher bond rating as we go through the launch of our fiber products. So conversely, Moody's was much more positive. They recognized the risk associated with the rollout. However, they were optimistic about what we might be able to do with the addition of fiber to our network, not just through offerings to our customers, but also what we can do on our electric network with the capabilities of the fiber. So Moody's held their ratings. Gas debt was not rated. We don't have any issues during this offering. Water held stable. No changes in bond ratings by either Moody's or S&P. Now here's the interesting thing. Wastewater. If you've been on this board long enough, you know everything that we have gone through with wastewater with the consent decree. This time with S&P, we had a new analytics team, brand new team. We'd never worked with this group before. They asked us plenty of questions and made us supply a considerable amount of data to them. But when they came back, they were very, very positive in their response to KUB. They were complimentary of our management of the consent decree, both on an operational perspective and a financial perspective. I think they recognized what we had been through and just how well we had handled every aspect of the CD. So S&P actually came back with a positive outlook on our wastewater debt. I don't want to get too excited about this. Mark's pretty excited, but I'm going to try to keep calm. This could possibly lead to the AAA rating, according to our conversations with them, coming out of the consent decree. So I think this is a acknowledgement to everyone who's worked through this process that our rating agencies know this. And I know Mark is wanting to speak.
I was just going to say that is very exciting news in our world. Yes. Actually, to achieve a AAA rating, after all, and still given the level of outstanding debt, I think speaks volumes for the whole organization and the board and your leadership as well.
Yeah. So, good news from S&P on that front, and then obviously Moody's held their ratings for wastewater. So, a little bit about the ratings process. Let's look at the actual bids in the sale. All right,
Mr. Hood. I'm sorry to interrupt.
On the Standard & Poor's AA minus, can you request a re-review, or is that something they will do at some point?
Each time we issue, they will review. So we can't we can't request it on this issue, but we will see them again when we go through the debt process that Mark talked about earlier, issuing the additional $79 million. So we will see them over and over and over the next couple of years as we finance our rollout of the fiber electric network. So, yeah. Okay, so bids on the electric bonds. As I mentioned, we got good activity from the bond market. You see here 12 bids on the electric bonds. That's really about as many as I can ever remember. I think one time we maybe got 13 bids on an offering. So this is a lot of activity in a bond market that saw rising rates, but really started to see a lot of rising rates after this period of time. So you see there, Jeffries LLC was the low bidder, 3.357% true interest cost. Keep that number in mind as we talk about the refundings later. You're going to see a different number up there. So 12 bidders, Jeffries being the underwriter. Mark showed a couple of charts like this earlier. This really is the structure of the electric debt. We typically always issue levelized debt. You can see that here. There is one exception on this chart. The very first year you see a little bit of a lower bar there, and that's representing an all interest payment. Our financial advisor helped us out with that. It frees up just a little bit of room as we work our way into fiber, not having a principal payment that first year. After that, truly levelized debt over the 30-year issue. A couple things to note here. Debt ratio after the offering set at 40%. That's pretty much in line with where we have been. I think Mark mentioned in his presentation our electric debt would continue to rise as we finance the fiber rollout. Right now, after this issue, we set at $307 million. All right, let's look at the new wastewater money. Once again, $11.1 million of new bonds. You had 7 bidders here. You see a lot of the same names. Different underwriter on this one being FHN Financial Capital Markets, coming in right at 3.4%. If you notice competitive bidding, this is a pretty tight range here when you talk about from top bid to low bid. So I feel like we've really got good offerings on the debt that we issued. Once again, you can see the structure of the wastewater debt there, completely levelized, 30-year issue. And with wastewater, I think Mark highlighted this earlier, but you're seeing us go up to $474 million. We go a little bit higher, but then that wastewater debt load starts to drop off as we pay off some of that debt associated with the consent decree, and the bond issues continue to tail off as far as the amount that we would issue with each new debt issue, because we don't need as much money to finance those capital operations now that we'll be past the CD.
And then on electric, that first pay that was just because of the electric fiber, you have that in even one.
Yeah, we can structure this debt a little differently. What our financial advisor was trying to do is just give us a little bit more room by not paying a principal payment year one in electric, because obviously we would have to potentially borrow just a little bit more debt in the next issue. So he was just trying to give us a little wiggle room as we really ramp up our fiber push. So, okay. All right, so fees associated with this debt. Obviously, there are a lot of people that have to help us when we do this. You've got anyone from the financial advisor, bond counsel. rating agencies, and in total, right at $300,000 for this issue, which is a little bit less than 0.5% of the cost of issues, and this is paid for out of the proceeds of the offering. Okay, changing gears. That was all new money. That was all to finance capital projects. Now we are switching over to look at refinancing of debt that was originally issued back in 2015 in the electric, water, and wastewater divisions. So we came to this board in February, and we touted a potential $8.2 million savings on refinancing debt. That sounded really good at the time. Right after that, a lot of noise from the Fed. Fed issues a rate increase the first time, and they promised multiple increases afterwards. Bond market starts responding very quickly, and our $8.2 million savings quickly turned into $4 million worth of savings, which at the time when we sold this debt, we were happy to get the $4 million worth of savings. If we were to do this today, there would be no refinancing. Rates have moved in the bond market now to where it would not have allowed savings in any of our divisions. So $4 million is still $4 million, and we'll gladly take it. That breaks out by division. You've got $2 million worth of savings in electric. You've got $700,000 in water. Water was obviously the tightest issue. That's the one that gave us the most concern. And then $1.3 million in our wastewater division. One other thing to note here is when we initially had planned the refinancing, we were going to refinance all of the coupons for each of the 2015 series. So basically take all that 2015 debt down, replace it with this new debt at lower rate. As it turns out, as the rates started going up, some of the very first years of those issues, we were not able to refinance. So on some of the charts coming up, you will see that the new debt starts in like 2025. So basically, we're keeping those old coupons out there on the 2015 debt for the first couple of years and then replacing it with the new debt. So that's just part of the fluctuation of the rate environment that occurred when we were doing this sale. So,
does one of these charts show what the original rate was on the bonds that were refinanced?
Yeah, you can see here was the average rate of what we held on the existing debt. So, you can see here the average rate as well, but it doesn't take a lot of movement till you start eroding those savings, especially when you're talking about a 25-year period of time. So when we were looking at this, the difference between like a 3.48 and 3.5 started to move the needle more than you would ever anticipate. So, like I said, glad to get this done when we got it done. All right. Last thing to note on this, we refinanced $65.3 million of new bond issues. That actually due to the due to the premiums that was associated with this issue, allowed us to take down $68.6 million of previous debt. So basically, the premiums allowed us to pay down 68.6 with only 65.3. Now, we'll go into that just a little bit more as we look at it based on each division. Okay, electric refunding bonds. You see here we had 8 bidders on the refunding bonds. Now keep in mind, this was only 16 days later than our original issues. So in 16 days, we went from a sub-3.4 electric bid to a 3.552% bid from Baird as the winning bid. That also was 30-year debt on the first bid. This is about 24-year maturation on this. So the market really started to move and move quickly with this type of movement. Generally, in a couple of weeks, you're not going to hardly see any difference in a bid. Not the case with these. All right, so look at the electric savings just a bit here. Like I said, we saved $2 million on the electric. First of all, let's look at the structure of the new debt. The bright blue section here represents the new debt. The dark blue is really setting behind that on this chart. So what it does is it creates a bar there that you can basically call the savings each year. You can see that over the life of the debt, the savings is pretty much spread consistently. You'll also note I mentioned that we were not able to refinance the whole series. First coupon on this electric debt is in 2025. So in 2023 and 24, we would pay coupons on the old 2015 debt. Another item to note here, due to the premiums that were associated with this electric bid, we actually reduced the outstanding principal of the debt by $1.7 million, which means we had $300,000 in savings of interest expense to culminate in the $2 million savings total. So electric and wastewater had premiums. As we move forward and look at water, I'll show you a little something different that occurred on water.
I just want to make sure I understand. So on the debt, we weren't able to, well, let me start over. The coupon payment is interest payment, so essentially, so annual interest. So we won't have to start paying interest until 2025 on one tranche of this.
Yeah, if you back up, if you can just imagine on this chart, imagine that blue bar being here in 24 and 23. We basically pay the old debt the first 2 years.
Okay.
And then the old debt is substituted with the new debt. Gotcha. So we've got a couple of, just think of it as a couple of payments still to make on the old before we can get to the new.
But they went ahead and committed to it.
Yes, we will replace the rest of that. And what it amounted to is the savings just weren't there. We couldn't get the coupons on the new debt where it would make any additional savings for replacing those. So,
thank you.
Okay. All right. So on wastewater, 4 bidders. Robert Baird was the winning bidder on it as well, 3.513%. I think it is one thing that we need to note on this. Water is AAA rated. If you notice, that was actually a little bit less than what we got on electric. It's a good thing in order to produce the savings that we got. So I think our AAA water bonds really paid off here. All right, same thing here. I know we're getting late in this presentation, but just note that these bonds kick in 2027 and a total of $700,000 of savings. Now, the water bonds were not bid with the premiums. Water bonds were bid closer to par. So really, all of your savings on water was through interest. There was a small amount, roughly about $100,000 reduction in principal. So a little bit different than what we saw on electric, different structure of the bid, but it also produced the most savings. All right. Moving on to wastewater, and you will see the highest true interest cost here, 3.679% bid from Hilltop Securities. There were 5 bidders, and this higher interest rate relates to the fact that the wastewater debt goes out longer. This debt does not mature until 2050, which is a little bit longer maturity date than the previous issues, which pushed that interest cost up on us. Now, obviously, this chart looks a little different than what you saw on the others because it's got this cut out in it, and this really relates to how the debt was originally structured back in 2015. If you stack up all of KUB's debt, not just this issue, there was a larger maturity in those couple of years, so when we shaped this debt back in 2015, we kind of smoothed our entire debt portfolio out. So that's what that is. It does look a little unusual, but the new debt follows the structure of the old debt. All right, last thing on wastewater, and this is pretty interesting too. We saved $1.3 million. However, you will note that our total amount of the principal went down by $1.4 million. So how in the world do you do that? That is because the premiums on this were so high that it actually generated enough cash to generate that $1.4 million that we could pull off of our maturities. However, the interest rates were higher. So really the math is 1.4 maturities down, but you're paying $100,000 extra of interest. So it's kind of odd when you think about refinancing debt and you actually end up paying more interest than you were paying, but that's what happened with wastewater. All right, so last item, the fees associated with this debt, very consistent with our offering of our new bonds, these revenue refunding bonds, 0.5%, $267,000. All right, I covered a lot of bond stuff, but if you need more bonds, I think Chair Askew has got 2 large documents in front of him that don't everybody make a rush at once, but yes, those are the official statements for the refunding and the revenue bonds along with the tax certificates, and they're available for your review.
Any questions?
Not a question, but a comment. I just wanted to say that over the years, with the wastewater challenges and how we have managed and how we have proceeded on that, we have told management quite often that we are very appreciative of the way that they've handled it. It's been a great job, but I want to, at this point in time, express my appreciation, too, to the Finance Department for how they handled the meetings with the rating agencies in this, because it's been my experience that it doesn't matter how well you manage a project and you handle a project, to get that kind of results and get a positive outlook, you've also got to be able to communicate that and tell your story well. So thank you for your work on that, and that really is something only, they talk about policy wonks. I guess there are bond wonks too. Maybe only us finance folks can really appreciate that, but that is a really outstanding accomplishment. So thank you for your work on that.
One question, because we've talked about wastewater, you may have covered this last month and I just forgot it, but have we made any progress on getting out from under the consent decree? Have they still not figured out how to do it?
Darwin, you can give the estimates. It's getting there. Yeah.
Last month I'd hoped we would have it by Memorial Day. That's probably not going to meet that expectation, but we're still in the discussion with the Department of Justice and EPA.
Just to remind the board, they don't have a lot of experience with people doing what they actually said they were going to do, and so we did. And, okay. Gabe?
That's a good problem to have. Commissioners, as we discussed in last month's meeting, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a key strategic initiative for KUB, and we've just really begun the process this last year. We put together a wonderful DEI team internally with a bunch of diverse leaders throughout our company. We began a lot of work and we began a lot of training. I want to introduce you to Eva Marshall, Director of Corporate Services and Diversity, to give you an update on the progress that's been made. And I discussed before, this is a long journey. We're just in the beginning of it, but we've made a lot of progress initially. I want her to introduce you to some of the things we've made on that area. So, Eva.
Thanks, Gabe. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm happy to be here to talk to you all about our DEI initiative. As you all know, KUB has always had and recognized the importance of having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce. And this commitment was formalized in 2016 when we identified the DEI strategic team. The team was challenged with increasing diversity to reflect the communities we serve, promoting an inclusive workforce, and also ensuring that we had diverse leadership across KUB. And we've made progress in this area, in particular over this last year. And just a little teaser that we have some really good news to share at the end of the slides, with some data points to share with you related to those 3 bullets there. But in 2021, we knew that if we wanted to make KUB stronger, that we had more work to do. And we decided that we were going to engage an outside consultant to help us evaluate what we could be doing differently, what we could be doing better, to really enhance what we have already started since 2016. With our goal really centered around making sure that our employees felt valued, felt respected, felt a sense of belonging, and were included and safe. And based on this work, the Winters Group identified 6 key areas for us to focus on, starting with education, making sure that all of our employees knew that this was an important initiative for us, but more importantly, building that competency within our management team. It needs to be reflected from the top down. In addition to that, they also encouraged us to take a look at our recruiting practices and our retention practices related to promotions, as well as expanding our community engagement. That's a lot to be done without having any full-time staff dedicated to that. So they also encouraged us to make sure that we had a full-time DEI leader in this area. And we, during our recruiting process, were incredibly fortunate. We not only found one person, but we found 2 people that we really knew that we couldn't do without. And joining us today, that's Tanisha Baker and Amy Kennedy, if you want to raise your hand. We're happy to have them here. I believe many of you all know Tanisha. She has been very present in the DEI space in the Knoxville community for a very long time. She is a well-respected strategist in this area, and she comes to us with 18 years from working with Project Grad. Tanisha holds a bachelor's degree in actuarial science from Florida A&M, and a master's degree in education from UT. Before coming to KUB, Amy worked with East Tennessee Children's Hospital, and she has 15 years of experience in training and 8 years of experience in DEI efforts. She holds a bachelor's degree in sociology with a concentration in race and ethnic relations from Lee University and a master's degree in educational psychology specific to adult education. And a lot of the work that you're going to see from me sharing today is a culmination of the work that they've done in a very short period of time over the last 10 months, alongside the DEI strategic team and the leadership support that we're getting from senior staff and the management across KUB. So with that, I want to start off with probably the most important piece, which is education and skills development. One thing we learned from the Winters Group is that if you're really wanting to take DEI seriously, it is really based in skills. And then any time at KUB when we want to develop skills, we dedicate education and development to that. And we established a cascading model to ensure that we had alignment from Gabe down to the frontline CEO, or frontline employees. I think some of our employees want to be CEOs. And if you look over here at the graphic, what we did is we started with DEI 101. Let's not assume that anybody knows what DEI really means. And we wanted that education to start with our managers. Then our supervisors would get that training, and then our employees would get that training. And then we would move on to the next education series. So once management completed DEI 101, they'd move to fostering inclusion. While management was in fostering inclusion, supervisors were taking the DEI 101. And this structure was very intentional because we wanted to build a culture of inclusion from the top down. And this cascading model ensured that employees at every level of the organization were seeing the inclusive behaviors modeled by their leadership team before they were being expected to behave in a certain way. So this is probably one of our biggest lifts, and year to date we've had a little over 200 employees complete this training, and when you clock every single hour that these individuals have had, we've had over 1,000 hours of DEI training that's been done across the organization. But we know education is not enough in itself. We also need to reinforce the behaviors that we're teaching you in the classroom. We want ongoing messaging to our employees, and we do that with multiple platforms, and one of those might be an email from Gabe. He might be giving a status update of how we're doing in the DEI space. He might speak to a specific month that's being recognized, like, Hispanic Heritage Month or Black History Month. We also do weekly articles in our electronic newsletter, but we also know that we have a lot of employees that are out in the field and don't have the benefit of reading those. And so our message monitors serve as that conduit for them to have an opportunity to see that information, but we also encourage our managers and our supervisors to make sure that they're sharing that information as well. And then we've created this DEI SharePoint site, and you can see here on the left there's a series of blocks that provide resources. So if somebody's curious a little bit more about a certain area, they have an opportunity to explore that. Then we have the center larger box where we might showcase a specific area of interest at any given point in time. If somebody happens to miss the weekly article that we're putting out, they can come here. Just want to point out, it's hard to see for most of us, but on that far right corner is International Women's Day, and we're spotlighting Amber Ray, who's our very first female line worker apprentice. Very exciting to be able to showcase that. But in addition to all of that, it's really important that our employees feel like they have people that they can talk to and that it's safe. And so Tanisha and Amy, myself, and Deanna have all made ourselves available for continuing conversations. So if after a training session, I didn't really feel comfortable asking that question in front of a group, let me have that conversation. or if I just want a one-on-one discussion about a specific topic that we haven't even brought up yet, or if there's an opportunity where we can be doing things a little bit better to create a more inclusive workforce, this is an avenue that has been created for us that we've created for our employees. So when we talk about our employees, we want to focus on their experience. And that experience begins with the recruiting effort. And so if any of you all saw our old job posting, it existed for 20 plus years and it got a facelift recently. And we're really excited that it's more streamlined, it's more welcoming, it really hits to the points of what we're trying to recruit for. But a very important element during the recruiting process is us making sure that our recruiters, our managers, our appraisers, and our supervisors that are sitting in the room are aware of biases that might creep up during the recruiting process. And so we are making sure that they have that awareness and they can keep that bias in check. What we learn is that we all have biases. It's just part of who we are, but what you have to do is pay attention to them and acknowledge how you can make sure that you're making unbiased decisions. We also knew that our pipelines are not as diverse, our applicant pipelines are not as diverse as they would like. So we're really spending some time exploring what we can do to increase that diversity in the applications that are coming in the door. And so we've partnered with diversityjobs.com. You can see there some of the job boards that are affiliated with them. It's a really new venture. Don't know how successful it is, but we are very hopeful that it will provide some pipelines for us. But more boots on the ground work that we know can be very fruitful is developing professional diversity pipelines with the communities and establishing partnerships. So one of the things that we often have heard from the chamber, have heard from other peers in this DEI space is that a lot of folks sometimes, they graduate from here, they move to Atlanta, they move to Miami, they move to wherever it is that their culture is thriving and there's a lot of other people like them. But we know that there are people who are here who are from underrepresented areas, so let's network with them and making them aware of the jobs that we have open, so hopefully they will consider coming to KUB. So if you have decided to come here, then we want to make sure we can keep you. And a very important element of that is knowing what your career progression is at KUB. And so we created an Employees on the Move document that's available on that SharePoint site. And any employee can pull that up, understand I can transfer to a different department. I can apply for a cross-training opportunity. This is what I need to do if I would like to have other skills and opportunities developed. Who do I talk to? And gives them a lot of transparency and control of being able to have informed information about how those processes work. So once we look at that, we also have started looking at what can we do when somebody first comes in the door. Those first few months, that first year are critical to somebody deciding to stay at KUB. And so we've created an inclusive onboarding checklist. Some people might think, that seems like low-hanging fruit. What really are you talking about? And it really is, but it goes beyond making sure somebody has their computer, has their truck, has their phone. What it really means is the team that I'm getting ready to go and work with knows that I'm coming, knows the day that I'm coming. I'm encouraged to go and have a conversation with you. I'm encouraged to ask you if you want to go to lunch. The manager has already set up 30, 60, 90-day appointments to do a check-in to make sure you have all the resources that you need. So being much more intentional about creating a welcoming environment. And how do we evaluate that? We evaluate that with a 90-day survey. And we are only a few months in. We've got 64 out of 100 employees that have responded, and we're really pleased with the results. Everything that we are evaluating is over the 90s. And I want to draw your attention to my leadership team has supported me, and we got 100% people that agreed to that particular statement. So this is one way of us gauging how employees are feeling. about inclusion and about how they're welcomed when they come to KUB. We will continue to use this as opportunities to adjust as necessary. There's an opportunity for them to write open-ended statements, and if we see anything, we reach out to that individual and explore and dig a little bit deeper, but we're wanting to be really intentional of learning early on what that experience is like. Another area of focus, as you saw from the Winters Group, is us expanding our community partnerships. And you all are well aware of the job fair that we did in January, and a lot of great success, a lot of hard work going out into the community, making sure that we reached out to different partners, and we had over 200 people attend. When you look at the demographic of the people who attended the job fair, it was much more diverse than what we actually see in our applicant pool. Applicant pool shows about 18% racial diversity. The attendance at the job fair was closer to 60%. So that just inherently opens us to many more opportunities. And you can see here, of the 9 job fair applicants that we hired, 88% were people of color. But we also are committed to having our staff participate on nonprofits and serve on the board and be engaged in our community. And just a couple of the ones that we have here are the Knoxville Area Urban League, the YWCA, and the Wesley House. And having this opportunity allows us to give back to our community, but also be able to connect with the areas and the customers that we serve. And there's a lot that it's a win-win situation. As a matter of fact, one of the job fair applicants that ended up getting hired was actually because of a board member that works at KUB at the Wesley House who shared that we were having the job fair. This person attended the job fair and they got hired. And that also continues to grow. So we've heard about the stadium at lunch today. We heard about the stadium during the budget. And the Sports Authority did an internship program, and we're excited to have an electrical engineering student here working with us. You all also know we have the Teamwork expansion that's happening, and we really see that as a wonderful feeder to our Utility Apprentice program. This program's modeled after our very successful line worker apprentice program that we've had for many decades. And what we're really focusing on here is a 1 to 2 year program for somebody that has absolutely no experience, like a teen worker. So you think about this program, the individual comes in, completes the program, automatically gets to advance into the position that they did their apprenticeship in. And what we were seeing with our teen workers is for those that did not want to take the path of college, they would apply for a construction tech position. We'd have over 100 applications. They really couldn't compete because they've never driven a backhoe or worked with any heavy equipment. This gives them an opportunity to come in with no training and no education in the utility space, and we do that for them. So I think September, when the Teen Work Program expansion was presented, Kalen Jones was here. He's our very first utility apprentice, and he's about a year in, and we look forward to him graduating into becoming a full-time construction tech after the completion of his utility apprentice. This summer, we will post for 4 additional utility apprentice programs, and people have the opportunity to work in construction, maintenance, transportation, our meters department, or plant operations. So we're working hand in hand with our managers to roll out those 4 postings later on this summer. And we'll be partnering with agencies like SEED, Penultimate, the Knoxville Area Urban League to help us feed into those to get feeders for the applications in that process. So switching gears to our external-facing community partnerships, our Supplier Diversity Program, which is administered out of the Procurement Department, is actually our oldest DEI program. It was born out of the PACE 10 era when we knew we were going to be spending lots of dollars lots of money on infrastructure projects, and we wanted to make sure that minority and women-owned businesses had an opportunity to bid on that work. And we recently added the small business program, and I'll talk a bit about that on the next slide. This program is led by Makisha Thompson. She does a fabulous job in real estate, and she does a fabulous job in recruiting for us and bringing awareness to our supplier diversity program. But what we knew is that it can be an intimidating process to bid for KUB if you've never done that before. And so she sits down with them, walks them through the process, helps them understand how to navigate the process, and a lot of efficiencies have been brought in to make that process a little bit less intimidating for somebody who's never done that before. She's also responsible for monitoring and reporting on those results. And the good news is there's a lot of success there to speak about. So year to date, many of you who sit on the Audit and Finance Committee get a more detailed report in this space, but we have over 100 minority and women-owned vendors that we're working with. And if you look over the last 11 years, we've awarded over $200 million to minority and women-owned businesses. From the small business standpoint, it is pretty new. It was kicked off in December of 2020, and it targets businesses that have 50 or less employees and an annual revenue less than $10 million. We are expecting to award more than $500,000 by the end of this fiscal year in contracts. And over to the right, you're going to see a vendor spotlight, Accurate Contracting Services. They've had 2 awards, one of them, the most recent one being the Fleming's office upgrade. You can see Reggie and his staff there featured, and his second 3-year contract with the natural gas water heater program. Between those 2 programs, you're talking about $200,000 in awards. But I've covered a lot related to what the Winters Group suggested that we really focusing in on education, focusing in on looking at our recruiting and promotional processes, and expanding the communities that we serve. And all of that is really meant to have the community, have potential employees, have current employees see us as an employer of choice. And that brings me to what I talked about early on at the beginning of the presentation. And before I get into the good news, I really want to kind of take a moment and just talk about where we've been. And so I mentioned in 2016 we had the DEI team that was initiated. And in 2017 we were at a really great place where we were doing the workforce mix initiative. So we were taking a lot of contract work and bringing it in-house. And so we were staffing up, and we did a lot of outreach to churches, a lot of outreach across the community, and got our number up to 12.78. But then we kind of plateaued and dropped over the following 4 years, and that was really why we wanted to engage the Winters Group. What weren't we doing that was allowing us to retain employees in this space? And, you know, we knew we were losing people to retirements. We knew we were losing people to resignations, but what could we be doing differently? And that's where we really learned about DEI is multifaceted. It's about, you know, being respected and trusted in your community. It's about making sure that you have an inclusive workforce, and then the numbers start to reflect that's where people want to be. And we're really excited that in 10 short months we've gone from 11 to 13.13%. And if you look at the full-time hire table to the right, we've gone from 11 to 27%. So we've tripled the number of a little bit more than tripled the number of hires of people of color in a 10-month time span. And I know that Jamie and the Fiber Division has been committed to ensuring that we are giving individuals in the underrepresented areas opportunities. And in 2020, 6 of the 11 hires have been people of color. So we're very committed to this work. And one thing we also know is that current employees and future employees are looking at the leadership. Do I see myself in the leadership ranks? And that is something that has been in the works for quite a bit of time. In 2014, the Leadership Development Program was established. We've graduated 4 classes from the Leadership Development Program, and with the recruitment of each class, we were very intentional to have representation of different races in each of those classes. And of the 123 that have graduated, 16% are people of color. What's really amazing, I think, is the knowledge that we were going to need to do succession planning, and today 67% of our management is from somebody who graduated through our leadership development program. But
what are our numbers as far as the retention of those 123 graduates?
I don't have it in front of me, but it's strong. I can send the data point.
I'm just curious as to whether we've been able to
Keep those people by engaging them in that program.
That was one of the things I didn't put in my notebook, but I can get that for you. One of the things that I found really interesting when just looking at our management team, and I think this is, again, the intentionality that is required from a DEI space is, when Mentha was here, she had a strong focus on, bringing women into leadership. And today we have 31% of our management team being females. And when you look at the industry standard, and I couldn't find one specific to just leadership, only 23% of the utility workers are females. And so we're at 31 in our management staff. We've got 10% of people of color, and then you see the demographics for our generations. But one of the things that we absolutely understand and that we know is that in order to have people to serve in leadership, you have to start building that pipeline. And it takes time to make sure that you're building those pipelines, and that, for us, we don't have a lot of issues recruiting entry-level positions for underrepresented groups, but we do find it challenging at the professional season level. So those are the areas that we are really just taking some time to figure out, how do we navigate that? What's that silver bullet? I don't think there's a silver bullet, because all the DEI folks that I speak to are in that same boat, but we do recognize that if our commitment is to have diverse leadership across KUB, it takes intentionality in working in that space. And so when I started, I mentioned to you all the things that came out of the strategic plan, and here's that list. And I think that we're making progress in this space, but when you think about DEI, it's not a destination, it's a journey, and it takes regular intentionality. But not only did we hire one DEI leader, we hired 2. We've begun our investment in education, and we're not done. And we can't underestimate that is something that is a constant drip. You do not do DEI training and then walk away from it, and then a year later do that training again. It is really changing the culture. And we've also have been doing some evaluation of our hiring processes and our promotional process, and we'll continue to look at opportunities in each of those areas. And we are committed to expanding the partnerships that we have in our community, not only for the opportunity to bring people to come work at KUB, but also to support the minority and women-owned businesses in Knoxville. And so before I close, I just really want to take a moment to thank Tanisha, Amy, Deanna, who's over the HR department, the DEI strategic team, and senior staff support. I spend a lot of time with other DEI professionals, and one of the things I'm very grateful for is the support that we have from the board to our senior staff to having the ability to do this really good work that takes a lot of commitment. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I think that I do a lot of work in this, and it's so important to have full support from the top to make these kind of changes happen. So I'm just really, really impressed with all that's been done in this time with your leadership team and the support that you have from the rest of the executive team. Something that just you probably or might not have with you right now, but I am curious to have information on. So, for example, you said that we've spent $200 million in the last 11 years. We've invested in small businesses. My question would be compared to what in terms of total? And I'm sure I'm not expecting some magical number, but just to be able to compare that so that in the future we can see the growth. Another thing I'd be interested in hearing about are, what has been the response or the stories we're hearing on the DEI training, not so much from executive teams, but from the line workers that you have been training. I also am curious about what the consultants talked about in terms of you all having conversations or opening space for your team members to speak to you, because oftentimes the experience I've had is folks are scared that their jobs are in jeopardy, so they'll say things are good, but how are we truly creating a space where there is no retaliation for sharing concerns that are seen in the community or in the job place? I think those are my questions.
Sure. I can speak to a couple of those things. So just for a clarifying point, and I may have said small business, the $200 million over the last 11 years is specific to just minority and women-owned businesses, right. So not just the small businesses, but yeah, that's something that we can certainly share with you. And it is every year we take a look at what our total spend is, and then we look at the total spend and how that compares just for minority and women-owned business. So that should be an easy deliverable. I don't know, Mark, if there's anything you want to speak to that about.
I can't remember the percentages off the top of my head. I think it's been in the 11 to 12% range, if I remember correctly. That is a part of an annual report we do give to the Audit and Finance Committee, but we can provide that to the full board.
What was that, and I remember seeing something about that, was that 13% using a total of companies or using a total of dollar amounts?
It was dollar amounts. Okay. But we also gave a report, and we can provide this to the full board, of how things changed over the year, how many new MBE, WBE firms came in, and we've got that over time as well as part of our active recruitment process. Yeah.
And then the DEI training and the response. Right now, the folks that have gone through it are our management team and our supervisors. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we're hearing is we have been very intentional to start off with foundational knowledge. So before we really get into the heavy lifting, let's just make this a safe space so everybody can understand, what does diversity mean, what does equity, what does an inclusion mean, and then let's talk about what does fostering inclusion look like. What are the behaviors that I should be sharing with you? And I think in each of those instances, you've got people that are coming from different places. You have people that are in a place of this makes really good sense, and then you have individuals who are saying, I've been a little bit afraid that this is going to require me to change who I am, and how do I still get to honor myself? And I think that at least from an evaluation standpoint of the classes that we've had, so we've had 200 people take the classes. On average, most of our evaluations, and Tanisha and Amy are the ones who facilitate the training, have been fives. Five out of five. And so that has been very well received. And I think you ask a really important point about the open space of being able to feel like I can have a conversation and not feel like my job is in jeopardy. That's where a lot of those conversations have been happening with Tanisha and Amy. I recognize that my position in the organization, people may not feel as safe to speak to me, but we have had a lot of people feel comfortable in coming and sharing with Tanisha and Amy and saying, you know, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm thinking, here's where I think things could be better. And so we haven't, you know, I don't feel like we haven't created or I feel like we've created an opportunity where they can be that sounding board, that safe space, and they will share with us, blinding, you know, anybody's name, and just say, here are the themes that we're hearing, here are the areas that we need to work on. And one of those areas is, I want to make sure I have opportunities for career development. You know, do I really feel like I'm getting that opportunity? And that's really where the Employee on the Move document was the reason it was created, was helping address that specific request.
For the sake of time, many of the questions that I had, Commissioner Caballero mentioned those, so I won't go back there. When you talk about the women in small business, I would love to see the breakdown between those two, so to really see where those dollars are going. And the other thing that I saw that I was going to ask a question about is those new hires. We had 164 submitted information. That means about a third didn't, and so I would love to know what we can do to get that third folks, because I think that might go back to what she was talking about in terms of, you know, those who have good, you know, who may say, hey, no great experience will, of course, readily submit, but those who might not have the best experience may be the ones who are reticent to submit that. And so that it's a third of them, so it's pretty, not an insignificant number. So just thought about that. So those are the only two things I had outside of some of the things that Commissioner Caballero mentioned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we attempted to make it a safe space with not requiring them to give their name, but at the same time, we can explore other ways with that.
I want to say one thing before we wrap up. Coming from an organization that, from a system of a government that has these issues, and system-wide, the judiciary is making great strides on a national level, and from various districts across the country. And in East Tennessee, I'm starting to trying to make the same changes. And from my perspective, it's amazing, and I want to give you kudos to the team and to the leadership for what you have accomplished in 10 months. It is hard. It is hard work. And for you to identify people who are experienced in this area, to create those safe spaces for people to come and feel comfortable, it's not going to happen overnight. And we can't expect, us as board members can't expect for this stuff to happen overnight. It's a journey. And so I commend you all for making sure that there is and Gabe as CEO, to make sure that there is a specified area for this. Because it's not something that you do, and I'm learning myself, it's not something you do hit and miss. It is a continuous, everyday thing. So that people, so it's kind of like osmosis. So that, you know, if you hear it enough and you live it enough from the top down, then people will eventually, the culture will change over a period of time. So that's what I wanted to say.
I want to echo those. You know, this is hard work, but it's also heart work. And you know, Gabe, it doesn't happen without leadership. You know, leadership from the top really getting engaged. And I will tell you, if we want to build trust, if we want to build a relationship with our communities, it's going to be important that they can see themselves in our organization when we go out and we talk about, you know, broadband, and we talk about all these other things that we're doing in the community. And if they don't trust us, if they don't respect the organization, if they don't think that the people there are people from my community who have my best interest at heart, as much as we try to do in the community outreach space, it will ring hollow to many of our community members. And so it's important that we do that.
And then the last thing, if all else fails in the it's the right thing to do conversation, it just makes darn good business sense. And if you need to know that, I can give you the data as someone who does this work day in and day out, that more diverse teams are more productive teams, they're more creative teams, they're more innovative teams, they work hard. So there's a whole lot of data out there that shows the importance of having diverse teams in the work that they do to move organizations forward. So thank you all for the work that you do. Gabe, thank you for your leadership, and Elba and the team. I think I know a couple of those people back there. Thank you for what you all do. And Deanna, oh, there she is, and Deanna as well. So thank you all.
I would just like to close by saying that I love the fact that we're a leader in this. It may have taken, in terms of getting started, this community has taken a long time to get started, and we know that. And that's not. We don't need to worry about the past. We need to be focusing on the future. And I would say that I've worked in this space for a long time, and this is a comprehensive approach, and I really like that. So I think that this would be the kind of approach that other major institutions in the community would want to come to us and say, "How did y'all do it?" And that's the position I want KUB to be in. So thank you for your work, and you put together the A-team back there on the back row. So that's good. Let's see. Any other comments? All right. Seeing none, is there anybody signed up to talk? Well, that's good, given the time. Let's see. We're going to follow an adjournment. The board will have refreshments across the hall, and that session will be open for the public to observe. Anything else? Meeting's adjourned.